And one morning he got up and his gardener had not trimmed the hedges, he had not swept the leaves, he had not watered the plants, and so our friend really irritated at him, and he scolded him, and the gardener said something back, so he fired him, and he essentially threw him out the door and into the street. About a month later, our friend and a friend of his were drinking, and they drank and they drank and they drank and they drank, and they got into an argument, which eventually got physical. And our friend whacked this guy. He fell back, hit his head on the stairs, and died. So he put him in the back seat of his car, and he drove him from San Miguel to was it Querétaro? To Cuernavaca. And, of course, he had sobered up by the time he got there, and he thought, well, I better turn myself in. I mean, the guy, his friend, his dead friend, is sitting in the back seat. And he goes to the police station, and he says, you know, I killed my friend. And the police said, where are you from? He said, San Miguel. He said, well, no, it's all right. Basically, they didn't want to deal with the murder. They said, no, it's all right. You just go back to San Miguel and tell the police, and it's all right. If y'all got in an argument, it was innocent. So he went back, and the police station is actually just a couple of blocks from where his business was. And he pulled up at the police station, and a cop came out and saw the dead guy sitting up in the back seat. And he said, what's happened here? And he said, we had an argument, and I hit him and killed him accidentally. But it's all right. And the cop said, well, no, it's not all right. And he said, well, no, I asked some other police. They said, no, it's not all right. Get out of the car. And they put handcuffs on him, and they took him upstairs to the jail. And they unlocked a cell and ushered him in. And he sat down. They closed it. They locked it. They left. And he looked up, and his former gardener was sitting right across from him. And the gardener said, he said, Carlos, La Vida Brinca. Life jumps. So that's where the title comes from. We don't really know what we're doing up here. We'll talk about the pictures, we'll talk about the process, whatever you like. It's a project I started 10 years ago. To some degree, I started because I so admired Keith Carter's photographs, and I wanted desperately not to try to copy him because I knew I would not come out looking good. So I went to pinhole cameras, which Keith had not done, and which looked very different than Keith's pictures, and just started fooling around with it. For 2 years, I've just experimented with the size of pinholes and the distance from the pinhole to the film and this and that and so on, and kind of got to the point where I started doing the kinds of things that you see in the show, which I like very much. And I can say that because I don't really feel totally responsible for those images. One of the wonderful things about using these cameras is that, at least speaking for myself, I can't truly envision what the picture is going to be because all the pictures are time exposures in a larger sense than all photography. Of course, it's time exposure. But these are 12 seconds, 15 seconds, sometimes an hour. There's one picture in there, I think, that's 2 hours. But my mind cannot accumulate what the film is seeing in that amount of time. So it's always sometimes a happy circumstance for me when I develop the proofs and I see what the film saw. But my eye never really saw what the film saw. So there are kind of two periods of really fun stuff when you're making these kind of pictures. One is when you take the picture, and the other is when you see it, if it's good. I'm hogging this. Elizabeth?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank Connie and Bill and Carla for getting me out here. It's a pleasure to be back in Austin, and it's really a privilege to have the opportunity to write about your work and now to talk about it. Over the last year, I've taught a couple courses for younger photographers, and in doing this, I've just become so aware of this divide that we now have in the photography world between people that are accustomed to working with cameras to take film and going into the darkroom and working with silver gelatin or with color, various kinds of processes that have developed over a long period of time. And then suddenly in the 1990s, everything began to switch, and there's now this divide with people that are in school or who have just gotten out of school who've never been inside a darkroom and who maybe have used 35mm cameras, but as teenagers, and they don't use them anymore. They don't use slides to show their work. They rely on computers to really see what their images are going to be. And it's just really clarified to me that whether you're working, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, because that could be a whole argument that we could have this evening. But what it's really put into focus for me is how important technology is for photographers. You know, whether you're an Ansel Adams purist who believes in never cropping, and you have certain attitudes about how a black and white print should be, or whether you're somebody who works with a digital camera and then downloads an image onto the screen and then begins to manipulate and change so that you're able to create something that camera never saw. You need to be able to use your technology in order to express what you as an artist want to do. You have to be able to master that technology. You can't let that technology master you. And when Bill invited me to write an essay for the book, what became so interesting to me was to see how an artist can use a technology that is almost by intention imperfect to create something very, very serious. A lot of kids do science experiments using pinhole cameras. I mean, I think there's even a picture of the Quaker Oats box that is kind of the standard thing that you'll find in textbooks or online. You know, how a kid can make a pinhole camera. And it's obviously the most low-tech way that you can go in terms of making an image. But what Bill has done is, as he said, he's sort of given up control. It's sort of a willful surrender. So that what ultimately happens is that he's allowing his intellectual side to merge with the intuition. And I think that's where the images are able to gain such dramatic power, such strength, such meaning. I was trained as an art historian, and so when I begin a project of any kind, I always like to go back to the roots of things. The roots of photography, is very interesting here because just up the road at UT is the very first photograph. I think it's just the most remarkable magic thing that Niepce's first photograph is here. And maybe some of you have seen it. It's a tiny little image, and it's very, very shadowy. And it's basically a picture that he took looking out the window of his studio or of an office. And you can barely make it out. You really kind of need to be told what it is. And it took Niepce an exposure of, I think, something like 8.5 hours to make that image. And when that happened, all the people that were scurrying back and forth, the horses and everything else that you could imagine in the 1830s, none of that is seen. There's only the buildings, the still things that are really visible in that photograph. So one can imagine that in Niepce's days and in the days of Daguerre and the creation of the daguerreotype, there was so much of the idea of chance and experimentation and exploration that entered in the equation of what's going to happen when you have a light-sensitive surface and a camera to capture that. And for me, what's so exciting about Bill's work is that his work also contains the same thing. Here we are now, over 150 years later, and in a certain sense, Bill Wittliff, with this mode of pinhole photography, is also capturing the accidental, sometimes the mistakes. He does know what he's doing with these cameras, and he's able to control quite a bit with them. Don't get me wrong. And Bill could talk more about this because he actually makes certain cameras to create certain images. But there's a certain part of it that's left to chance. And I think that in doing that, he's also letting that more emotional side of what he's thinking when he's seeing the image come out. And another thing that I was thinking in terms of his photography is to go back to not only to the roots of photography and the invention of photography, but go back to the word photography. What does that mean? It means to inscribe with light, or to write with light. And I think it's very apt that we're talking about the idea of writing a story, writing a picture when we talk about Bill Wittliff, because his roots are in written words. His roots are in telling stories. So what's happening with these photographs is that we have these little intimate stories. They're almost like brief histories. I mean, we're used to thinking of stories taking place over a period of days, or a history taking place over decades or a century. In this case, we're getting stories that last just a few seconds. But these are things that the naked eye can't see. So suddenly what is laid bare in these photographs are these sort of very intimate things that happen before our eyes every day, but that we can't see. The naked eye can't see them. And what Bill Wittliff was talking to me about when we first began working is that you have to be open to the chance. And I thought that was such a wonderful thing, because so many photographers, so many artists that work in many media want to be very exacting with their technique. They want to be able to control everything. And that's certainly something that you see a lot with people working with photography and people working with digital photography and computers. But Bill says, no, let's be open to the chance. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens when light is able to touch the surface over a period of several seconds. And let's see the story that takes place. And the story that happens is something that I think really touches deep inside. It's really about about representing not just reality, but a heightened reality. The reality in these pictures is more the reality of the imagination. It's the reality of the enigmatic, the reality of dreams, the reality of our fears, the reality of the things that we most deeply believe in. I mean, all these things he's captured, and he's captured them with very, very simple things. The image called Jesus Wept, I think, is just a plastic statue. You know, and there's a lot of instances like that where the place where Bill was at, or the thing that he was looking at, was not necessarily so remarkable. But in allowing himself to be open to that chance, he's able to create something that I think is very exceptional. And for that reason, I want to thank Bill for sort of letting us into this world and think about the fact that these magical things are also happening for us every day in front of our eyes, and that we also just have to be open to the chance so that we can see them too, because they're there. And so I think it's a wonderful book and a wonderful exhibition, and it's really worth seeing, because the more that you look at these photographs, I think the more that we can all get out of them.
There's one photograph in particular that Elizabeth mentions in her introduction, which is called Spirit Animal. It's in the second gallery over here. It was taken in a cemetery in Harlingen. And if you look, in the upper left-hand corner, there is the head of a wolf, which is created by the wind blowing through the branches of a tree. But it is absolutely the head of a wolf. And that's the kind of thing that can happen with this kind of stuff. I mean, it's just being lucky, you know, just there for the chance. Steve, do you have nice things to say?
I was going to save them for your funeral, but I'll... Well, Bill may have invited Elizabeth to write the introduction to his book, but he didn't invite me. I went over to his office one day, and he was showing me these pinhole photographs, these Tragaluz photographs. And I said, I want to write the introduction to your book, because there was something so powerful and weird to me, and I'm sure you've all had that experience looking at them. To me, it was like I had looked at these photographs, and I felt like I had just woken up and had been sleepwalking and had seen all these images in my sleep. There was something so primal and weird and haunted about them, and I couldn't get over how they were so unlike any other photographs I'd ever seen. And I'm not an authority like Elizabeth. I haven't studied the art of photography in in any meaningful historical way.